Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back, and now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact.
Hey everyone. I'm doing something a little different today. Actually, very different. Today, I have with me a client. And this is not something that I normally do. I don't tell a lot of client stories on the podcast, as you know. But this was a story that this client, we're calling her L for the purposes of this episode. She posted about it in the large Facebook group. She is a longtime member of the Should I Stay or Should I Go Facebook group. She did my program a couple of years ago, and she had posted about some of the trials and tribulations of this particular aspect of, it was something that came up after her divorce. And then when she got the ruling that she got from the judge on it, she said she really wanted to go public and she wasn't really sure how to do that. And she posted that in the Facebook group. And I said, you know what, this is a story I would love to tell on the podcast. And so here she is. And she is here with her attorney telling this story because I think it's really important. So Elle is not only a divorced mom, a longtime member of my Should I Stay or Should I Go Facebook group, someone who's gone through my program. She's also a successful career executive. She's the mom to a 7-year-old daughter, and she is an advocate for sexual freedom, having been a member of her local BDSM and kink communities for over 2 years. I think this story is really fascinating. It's really interesting. And I think there is, while it didn't necessarily set legal precedent, as we will talk about in the episode, there are ways that this might be, that you might be able to use this in your case. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Elle and her attorney, Jonathan. Elle and Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me. This is very unusual. I don't usually have client or follower stories on my podcast, but I think this is such an important one and so interesting. I really felt it was important to share and also to get your story out. I mean, this was the big question, right? Was how do I share my story? So to get others to understand what happened to me. And I was like, let's do it on the podcast. So thank you for being willing.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you.
So why don't we just start, Elle, with you telling us a little bit about.
I separated from my ex-husband in, I guess it was around the summer of 2020, and our divorce was finalized that following summer, so 2021. And in our divorce, agreement, we had settled everything, obviously, that needed to come up, including custody of our 7-year-old, who's currently 7. And, we have 50-50 custody. And that was going really well. It had been going very well since we separated. In sort of, I would say maybe the spring of 21, I had been kind of on my own for a few months at that point and was kind of ready to start dipping my toes back into the dating world. And, having come out of this marriage where a lot of the time I was feeling low self-esteem, not confident, not sexy, all those things that happen, I think, a lot of times at the end of marriages. And I was ready to kind of explore that again and get back in touch with that part of myself. Got involved with some communities here locally, some sexual communities that are around kink and things like that, and was exploring my own interests and doing some online, adult activities that were consensual and all of that. And long story short, fast forward to the end of 2021, our divorce has been final. We've been doing, custody 50-50 for several months. It's been going great. My ex-husband stumbles across some of these profiles that I had online that were, adult content, and basically flips out, immediately kind of knee-jerk reaction, files for primary custody of our daughter, and files for a modification of the, divorce agreement. And yeah, that started this whole process for me. It's been a long time coming. We just got our decision in May of this year. So that was all the way back December 2021 to now. So that was kind of the background.
And so his allegations, what was he alleging? That your online presence or your sexual explorations made you an unfit mother? Is that essentially what he was alleging? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, Jonathan can jump in and kind of clarify anything here, but I think like the crux of his arguments were that my activities were somehow putting my daughter in harm's way, either by, again, his assumption that, that I don't know these partners, or that their sexual interests make them unsafe in some way.
If they are involved in, let's say, the BDSM or kink community, therefore they must be like pedophiles or unsafe people, and that they're strangers and they're coming over to your house at all hours of the night, right? All sorts of like grand assumptions.
Right. I mean, even though I was very clear that none of that is happening on my parenting time, obviously, it still didn't really matter in terms of his argument. I don't think it was a matter of, oh, these partners know where you live. And then there was all kinds of just, ridiculous other arguments in terms of COVID exposure and my daughter's health status, and just, things that really made no sense, to me, that were just kind of, pulling at whatever he could. But yeah, that was the basis of his arguments and allegations, that I was somehow unfit for doing that.
Jonathan, is there anything you want to add to what these allegations were from a legal standpoint? What he considered his legal standing to be, or what his attorneys had stated his legal standings to be?
When you're looking at a custody modification, you're looking at the best interest of the child. But before that, in most states, you have to establish that there has been a substantial change in circumstances since the custody order was entered into. It's assumed that at that point, that was the right thing. And so then you have a burden there's an assumption that usually continuing what was found to be the right thing at the start is what would be the right thing now. For a court to even consider opening that back up, you have to convince the court that there was a substantial change in circumstances. When you have a trial, you're at the same time both arguing about whether there was a substantial change in circumstances, and if there's been a substantial change in circumstances, then in the current point, what's in the best interest of the child.
Right.
And then the court would weigh many different factors. From a legal perspective, he really ran into the fundamental problem that there was no substantial change in circumstances. There was no change in the child's circumstances. This had nothing to do with the child. This had no impact on the child at all.
And so, but he was claiming that it did, that somehow Elle's daughter was now in danger from all these unsavories sort of coming into her life.
And I think there was this point too, that he was claiming, that he had not been aware at the time of the original agreement that, that I was participating in some of these things. But either way, the fact that there was no material change in circumstances didn't change the fact that all of my activities were out and, and exposed and talked about and argued and litigated. So,
right. So your privacy, so in the midst of all of this, your privacy was violated, is now a matter of public record.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. How did he happen to stumble upon your profiles? Out of curiosity.
That was such an interesting point. And, yeah, so he is a user of these sites. From what I understand, and I think this came up really clearly in court, he was just browsing, one of these sites and sort of happened across my content. And that sort of led him down the rabbit hole of finding everything else. But yeah, I mean, the hypocrisy of that is sort of mind blowing.
I mean, it's pretty hilarious. Okay. And
Yeah.
so did you attempt to mediate this, or was this immediately you had to go in front of a judge?
I wanted to discuss it from the beginning. And of course, if you just take it back to that moment where I get this text message from him that says, I know what you're doing online. I have already contacted my attorney. I'm filing for custody. Our daughter is not safe with you, and I intend to get full primary custody. He was not willing to discuss it at all. And even though on one level I knew how absurd it was, as a mother, I'm sure you can relate to this. There's still that like rush of panic. Yeah, that's like,
absolutely.
I will do anything. At that moment, it was a feeling of what can I do to just make this go away? And there was certainly a temptation to just pull it all down, beg him not to file, tell him I'm not doing it anymore. You just have those temptations. And it really took time talking with, with Jonathan, my attorney, and just kind of recentering and making sure and validating that I was doing nothing wrong, and anyway, yeah. So I wanted, I would have been open to that conversation. He was not. And I think even up until, very shortly before we went to court, me even asking Jonathan, is this worth another shot at just like, is there any kind of agreement we can come to? And they had one last kind of final quote unquote settlement offer or whatever, which was, an apology to my ex-husband.
Oh my.
I think there were potentially some measures they wanted me to take, like changing my locks or something. It was just a ridiculous. Oh, and then of course paying for his court attorney costs. I mean, it was just this outrageous offer that was really just laughable, and that was the best they could do.
Deeply offensive that you would have to apologize to your ex-husband,
right,
for the sexual activities you're engaging in at post-divorce.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jonathan, it looks like you want to chime in here.
Yeah, so I'm looking back at the first correspondence, which is what Elle had received when she reached out to me from the ex-husband's lawyer to Elle's then current lawyer. We've got this big concern. And so basically, it's a letter, it's like 700, 800 words. It is here are our demands.
Wow.
This is sent December 9th, 2021. And it's like, these things should be done by December 16th. So the first one was she should take down whatever she has online that is publicly available and is sexually explicit. Second, that she should refrain from bringing people who are essentially strangers into her home for intercourse. It's just the whole thing. It's just so offensive, just getting into her, questioning her judgment and making her like restrict herself more in ways that she wouldn't, as if she's not a very capable adult, a very responsible adult who is conscious about the risks that she takes, as certainly any woman in our society is.
It's sort of presupposing that women don't understand the danger that they're in every single day as they walk down the street, let alone enter into sexual intercourse or whatever, yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. Right.
Yeah. And then the third point was something that it was actually quite reasonable, but also ironic. They wanted an agreement that the child would not be introduced to any romantic interests until they've been together for at least 6 months. And that is a standard practice. The ironic thing is that Elle was doing this, following this, and her ex-husband was not.
He had introduced our daughter to at least 2 romantic partners in the year that all of this was happening.
Right.
Meanwhile, she had never met anyone I was involved with, sexually, romantic or otherwise, since, since the divorce. So the irony, the hypocrisy through and through, it was everywhere.
And then the fourth and final thing was requesting that she take various security measures in her apartment, like installing surveillance cameras and a deadbolt lock. Again, is going to this idea that she is not aware of risks to her safety and having good judgment about what she needs to keep herself and her daughter safe.
Right. Jonathan, you were not Elle's attorney at this time.
Correct.
And I think this speaks to something that's really important that I talk about all the time, which is making sure you have an attorney who actually specializes in the things that you need covered. And so, Elle, how did you come to find Jonathan? You brought this, clearly this was sent to your original attorey.
Mm-hmm.
And so
that represented me in the divorce. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what happened then?
Yeah, I mean, and she was great, and I would have, felt great with her representing me. But yeah, I just felt, as this ramped up, as I could feel the emotional intensity from his side, it just felt really important that I have someone, that had some experience with these types of cases. I needed to feel really secure. I knew it was going to come down to these issues around, around women and their judgment and their level of risk, and I knew it was really all about shame and control to begin with, right? But anyway, I had reached out to the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom, which is an organization I didn't even know existed before this, but just doing some kind of Google research about cases like this, came across that organization, and they pointed me towards their resource library, where they have all kinds of professionals that have opted to be in this directory that have, either poly specialties, with poly families, or, again, kink and BDSM friendly professionals. And they actually had named Jonathan, by name, and given me that suggestion. So yeah, immediately reached out to him, and that's sort of how we got connected.
That's so great. So it's the National Organization for Sexual Freedom. Is that what it's called?
National Coalition, I think, for Sexual Freedom. Is that right, Jonathan?
Yes. Yeah. NCSF.
Okay. And so, Jonathan, when Elle contacted you and brought you this case, what were your initial thoughts and feelings about it?
My first reaction was, this is just kind of ridiculous. Let's just point out to this lawyer how there's nothing here that is the husband's business. There's no way that they could succeed on this in court. Within a week, we'd prepared a letter in response, rather incredulous about their attitudes, because the logic just was never there. And that was clear from the beginning.
I mean, the logic, it's like, it's not there, but yet, given the culture that we live in, it's actually, it's everywhere, right? Control of women's bodies. This is in a post-Roe. Was this before or after Roe was overturned?
It's before, yeah.
Before Roe was overturned.
Right.
Okay. But it was certainly on the chopping block, right? We knew that we basically have known that women's sexual freedoms and liberation are in danger just from living in the society that we do, right? So did that sort of play into, was there any concern, Jonathan, from a legal perspective? Like, sure, this is ridiculous, but also well, given what we're up against culturally, maybe not.
There's always some uncertainty. Judges have enormous discretion. And even, compared to the discretion that judges have in many other types of cases, in like a criminal case or something, or in just a lawsuit over money, the discretion that judges have in a custody case is just so vast. It is almost impossible to have a successful appeal of a custody decision. I work in Maryland and in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., I happen to have a successful appeal of a minor provision of a custody order. And that was one of, I think, 2 cases that year that had a successful appeal out of thousands of custody and divorce cases in DC, and that's right. Typical. There's just so much in terms of the discretion of the judge. Being in a more liberal area, to be in a large city in the Northeast or on the West Coast is going to be very different than being in a small town in the South.
Very, right?
If I practiced in small town Texas, we would have been having very different conversations. I could feel significantly more confident and comfortable because of knowing, where this court is and the kinds of judges in the court and their general attitudes. Probably my most notable case before this one is a woman who, in 2019, her then husband, who she was separated from, and her ex-husband received from a former friend some links to this woman's having done some online sex work. And there were some sample videos and so forth. They obtained this information and then in a coordinated way went to the court and asked for emergency custody of their children, for the mother to have no contact. And they got it.
They went ex parte?
There was a hearing that she was at. She had a lawyer there who was not prepared for it. And there were 2 judges. It's a little complicated, but basically there was an old judge who, an old white man who clearly had very traditional ideas.
Yeah.
And seemed to have the idea that if a woman had nude pictures, that it suggested that she was an unfit mother. But it was like the first thing out of the judge's mouth was, are these pictures of your client? Tell me why you think she's entitled to have custody of her children, right?
Wow.
So this is crazy. Then I get contacted by this client on Sunday. I think this probably happened Thursday, Friday, and then took her a couple of days to find me. Yeah. I hear from her on Sunday. We get to work. By Friday night, I have her 3 kids all back with her. We filed emergency motions with the court saying that there was no emergency that would have justified having the emergency hearing to begin with. And just the whole thing was totally absurd and outrageous. And we had the dads had also contacted Child Protective Services, and so we were able to have the person come from Child Protective Services and testify that there's nothing wrong in mom's house. Mom seems like a good parent. And
these 2 things are not related.
Right. Yeah. We got those orders overturned and got temporary orders in place. Now, I think one thing that is important to keep in mind is that, like in Elle's case, just because you win a round doesn't mean that things are over. Right. With that client, I mentioned that she was separated at the time, had a pending divorce. She hired me in September of 2019, and so then we were scheduled for a trial in probably March of 2020. As you can imagine, that was postponed to June of 2020. And then that was postponed until April of 2021. And then we had a 4-day trial, and we won big. My client got primary custody permanent basis of the children.
Hmm.
And then her ex-husband decided to appeal.
Right.
And of course, it is very difficult to win an appeal. And in divorce, it's more possible because you bring in the financial issues, but it's still really hard. And they had no good grounds for an appeal. They essentially said the judge believed her and didn't believe him and his witnesses, and the judge should have believed me. And that is not one of the things that an appeal is for. There's no way for a judge to be making those judgments based on, papers, transcripts. It's understood that a trial court judge is the person who's there and is making that judgment of who's to be believed. And that was pretty clear to the judge in our case. And so we won that appeal. 3-4 months later, he filed a motion to modify custody. And we're now dealing with, we were able to drag it out some, but we're now dealing with probably having to have another custody trial in about a year from now.
Wow.
So that would be from the time that I started working with this client, that'd be 5 years.
Right.
In which she's been continually dealing with her ex-husband.
And it's very common, right, with personalities like this. This could go on for, till the kids are 18, right?
Yeah.
They become, very vexatious. They'll do anything to file another motion to keep you in court.
Yeah.
As much as possible, right?
Yeah. I had a friend, say to me too, just talking about the discretion that the judge has, from my perspective, just remember thinking all it takes is just one person to agree with him, right? As absurd as his logic is.
That's right.
All it takes is one person to believe it.
Yeah.
And then my friend kind of put it in some clarity too. There's also this like sex panic around children, nowadays in the news. It's like you throw out that the kids are in the mix and people are all of a sudden just losing their minds.
That's right. Because now, right, it's fascinating to me, right? So a woman is sexually liberated and she's exploring her sexuality and all of this stuff. And then she's bringing the child traffickers into her home, right? I mean, that's basically what they're saying. But yet men, very often, overwhelmingly, are watching porn like a bazillion hours a day, right? But they're fine. They're totally
we could
fine.
go, we could spend hours talking about whether or not this content would exist or there would be a market for it were it not for the male gaze, right? I mean, so that's a whole other.
Well, I mean, but I do think it's important, right? Because that is the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy that your ex-husband was actually consuming the content and then bringing this case against you for actually being on it when, like, that's how he fucking found it.
Right.
Are you kidding me? And as Jonathan said, as we said, this is up to the discretion of a judge, and you are rolling the dice. This is a huge gamble about, I mean, of course it's not even a question about whether you're going to go in front of the judge, but as soon as you do, you're basically, the risk is so high, particularly for women, because women are believed less about their allegations of abuse. That as soon as women allege abuse, they're actually believed less in court. If they allege child abuse, they're believed less than that. If they allege child sexual abuse, they're believed even less. If they accuse an ex of abuse and then the ex turns around and accuses the woman of parental alienation, when what she's trying to do is protect her children, she loses them. She has a higher chance of actually losing custody of her children. So these are all things that have been studied. And, the family court system, judges, has not caught up to the research or taken it into consideration and actually made systemic changes. So we are still at the discretion of people who don't have training in most of this and who are not, who are overwhelmingly old white dudes
Right.
with conservative values, right? So as Jonathan said, like just the fact that you're in this metropolitan liberal area was luck. And now for a quick word from our sponsor. The all-new, fully revised Should I Stay or Should I Go? After 3 years of this program existing in the world and changing women's lives, I decided to give it a full makeover. The all-new version has all new videos, a podcast-like audio stream if you want to take the work on the go, and completely updated resources for deepening your learning. The program consists of 6 core modules. The first of which is Who Are You? This is the section in which you dig deeply into your own personal development and get in touch with your inner guide, slay your inner critics, mine for values, and learn how to set healthy boundaries. The second module is How You Learn to Love and helps you understand your attachment style, love languages, and how to properly love and care for the most important person in all of this, yourself. Module 3 is called Why Are Women So Exhausted? And breaks down some of the issues around toxic masculinity and male entitlement, the myth of being a stay-at-home mom, and answers the question, he's fine. Why can't I just be happy? Module 4 is all about understanding abuse and includes videos on trauma bonds, understanding the cycles of abuse, particularly how they play out in your own relationship, and addresses addiction, infidelity, and mental illness. Module 5 is all about healing and moving forward and includes videos about therapy, couples therapy, healing from betrayal, emotional regulation, and grief. This section also includes my 90-minute workshop, Tackling Codependence, as well as my signature relationship inventory that will help you gain complete clarity on all the parts of your marriage and figure out what's his and what's yours. And Module 6 answers the question, is the grass really greener on the other side? With in-depth videos on dating, cultural and religious isolation, and what happens if you end up alone forever. Spoiler, you probably won't. Whether you decide to stay or go, this program will set you up for a lifetime of clarity and fulfillment. And if you've already decided to go, the program will help you unpack all that's happened and help you heal so that you can move forward without repeating the same mistakes that got you here in the first place. This program is priced super low at just $697. And if you use the code PODCAST, when you check out, you'll get $50 off the full price. What are you waiting for? You have been agonizing with this decision for long enough. It's time to finally know. Should you stay or should you go? And now back to our episode. So what happened when you got to court?
Oh, I mean, it was a long day. And I think, it was just a lot of the same things that I had already heard and was kind of prepared to hear in terms of, the accusations he was making. The best part of that day was, my chance to speak on my own behalf and say some of the things that I, wanted to call out, some of those things being, the absurdity of, my judgment being called into question, sort of the fact that I felt and still feel that in many ways, for me to find partners in these communities that I'm connected with and have friends in those communities and also, in kink and BDSM, there's this whole philosophy of like negotiation and shared expectations and value. Like you have those conversations about boundaries before you're even, engaging in person. And in many ways, it makes that safer than traditional dating, meeting someone on a dating app or on the street. I mean, if someone's a creep, they're going to be a creep no matter how you meet them. But in general, our community does a really good job of kind of weeding out those folks that don't honor those consent and safety boundaries because it's so important to the communities. So I was able to talk that through. I was able to say how important it is to me to be able to raise a child that is pushing back on what society tells her she should be as a girl and as a, growing up into a woman in this world. And that I feel like the best way for me to teach her that is to model that in my own life and push back against just frankly the misogyny that was sitting in that room in the form of her very own father.
Yeah. Did you say that?
I don't think I said it in those, and she'll understand that as she grows, I'm sure, but
yeah, sure. Sure.
So it was a really good opportunity, I think, for me to kind of, obviously with Jonathan's help crafting those words, but, advocating for my community and my rights. And
so the judge, when you walked in, it was a female judge. Yes.
Yep.
And so when you walked in and saw a woman, what were your first thoughts?
And we had sort of some pretrial hearings before, so I knew who the judge was going to be, and I knew it was a woman. And she had even, I think, in one of the pre whatever the hearing, the scheduling conferences, had said to him, kind of called it out that you're in a progressive city. And Jonathan, maybe you recall this, but I think she said something like, she even said that before same-sex marriage was legal, same-sex couples used to come to Baltimore to have their cases litigated because of the progressive nature of the city. And she was sort of sending him this message, like, do you know kind of what you're up against here? And so I felt more confident having heard that.
That's great.
But again, you still have the doubts. But yeah, so I felt good about having a woman. There were moments during that day that I had those doubts about, is this going to go my way? And one of the biggest moments, and I've since talked to Jonathan about this too, is she made this comment at the very end of the day, I'm not going to make a decision today, which in itself hurt, right? Because you're thinking this is so absurd. She should just rule right there, but I'm not going to make a decision today. And I want to make it, something to the effect of, I want to make it clear that the only people that matter in this courtroom are the children. And, it was a very pointed way of saying that just sort of, it made me feel like this is why women stay in abusive marriages, because they're being sent this message that they don't matter. And I understand it's family court. I understand we're there to talk about custody. But, if you can see that really this has nothing to do with the child, then you can see what it's actually about, which is, him trying to cause harm to me. So, yeah, there were a few moments where even though I felt good about it, I still wavered a little on whether I felt totally confident. I just thought, until I've got those words in my hand, I can't feel that relief just yet.
No, of course not. Of course not. And so how long was it before she did rule?
Well, that was September 22, and we didn't get the decision until May 23 of this year.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Oh my God. And so in the interim, custody was the same. You were still sharing custody 50-50. Yep. Everything was status quo. And was he harassing you in any way? Was he abusing you? Were there any orders for you to stop your behaviors or anything like that?
No, I think he felt like he was doing his duty as a father, and it was going to play out how it was going to play out. But either way, he had done his duty, I think, was kind of his. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't, even in the courtroom, I mean, the judge asked him at one point, what kind of arrangement do you want in terms of custody? Because he had said, it's not that I don't want her to have visitation. So the judge said, what visitation do you think is appropriate then? And he just fumbled over, I don't know. I want the court to decide. I want the judge to tell me what's, it was just embarrassing for him. So things continued as they were. I didn't hear much more about it from him. In his own mind, I think he thought he was doing some, I don't know.
Yeah. Something good. He thought he was protecting. I mean, right. He really did. And, let's say, give him the benefit of the doubt is that he is a victim of this conditioning too, right? Like he really did believe.
Yeah.
My guess is that he really did believe that you being on such sites and him being on such sites were completely different things.
Absolutely. It was the idea that she was posting the content and that people could see it was totally different to him than being a user of that content, which obviously tends to have a gendered dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And so, Jonathan, were those your arguments in court?
Oh, we had so many
I'm
arguments.
Sure. Can you share what some of them were?
Oh, sure. I'll pull up my my closing argument. I could read the whole thing, but it's long.
Okay. Why don't you, can you hit bullet points?
Yeah. So we're here on allegations. There's been a substantial change in circumstances. The court must determine if there's a substantial change in circumstances before even getting into best interests. There isn't a dispute about the basic facts. There's no basis to believe the child has any awareness of her posts or about her sexual partners, and everything else about the disputed issues has to be viewed in that context. So then the claimed impacts of her posts and the implications to safety from them. She doesn't use her real name on these sites. She doesn't include her address or telephone number or email address. Viewers online could only see that she's located somewhere in Maryland, which is far less specific than people routinely are on social media. People don't have any way to contact her off of the website. And I said there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans who post explicit images similarly without substantial implications for their private life. Then there were alleged safety implications. So I guess one thing that we didn't talk about specifically was there was a picture that she had posted where just pretty much of her face, where she had her clothes on, but it was on this website. She had a picture in which in the background, you could see a tiny baby picture of the child. So again, this is just imagine this is just a picture like you would see like a Facebook profile picture.
Right.
Just a nice clothed picture, and taken in the home, and in the background, tiny little baby picture. Just looks like a baby, like you'd never even recognize the child.
Would, like,
just
even come with a frame, kind of like generic baby picture. Yeah,
exactly. And so it was barely even noticeable that there was a photo of a child. So then basically it's like, okay, so this gives someone who sees the picture an awareness that the person in the picture probably does have a child in her home. Well, she happens to be a woman in her mid to late 30s. And the odds that a woman in her mid to late 30s has a child living in her home are quite high. No further information is required. I think it's probably something like 80% of women in their mid to late 30s have a child in the home. And most people do not try to conceal that they have children in their home, even when talking to strangers, as this is not considered particularly risky information to share. Claims of danger to the child, that photos were at one time posted on a site with sexually explicit images, requires reliance on extreme illogical leaps. Even so, when it was pointed out to her that there was a tiny image of the child in the background on a picture, she was like, okay, I didn't notice that. And she deleted it, or it was taken down. I think actually he reported it.
Yeah.
And it was taken down for that reason. I mean, she would have taken it down. It's no big deal. I mean, she certainly never had any intention to expose the child in any way to anything related to this. Definitely, because
she's not using her child pornographically. Yeah.
Right. And not only that, not even being like, oh, I'm a hot MILF or something. Like, I mean, like being a mother was not even
part of the narrative,
a factor in general.
It wasn't a selling point. It wasn't part of her marketing.
So he argued that, it could cause harm to the child in the future if she learned that her mother had made explicit posts online.
Yeah.
And it's true. At some point in the future, it's possible that the child could learn that her mother posted explicit material on adult websites. and it's plausible that someday learning such information could be embarrassing or confusing to the child. But embarrassment of parental choices is a reality of growing up, completely hypothetical at this point. Good parents expect to need to answer difficult questions about the choices they have made in all different contexts. And I said, certainly he will have to answer for some of his choices as well.
Yeah.
That part, right? That part. He will have to answer for how he found that her mother was right.
And just what he put her mother through. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Even if the court gave substantial weight to such speculation, there's no logic to the argument that the posts affect the minor child's interests, meaning her interests regarding whose custody she should be in, because of the risk of possible future embarrassment. He wasn't saying, I don't want her to ever see her mother again, right? She's always going to be the mother, and it would be equally embarrassing whether she has the 50% custody that she has, or if she had only every other weekend, which would be sort of the extreme to which he was potentially asking for. Again, there's no logic there. Then the allegations of harm coming from her encounters with sexual partners, rather than that those encounters were posted online. That she'd had sexual partners since the separation is to be expected. And it's undisputed that the minor child had not met any of the partners. And there's no evidence that they've impacted the child in any way. There's no basis for assuming that she has not used at least as much discretion as an average parent in deciding who to allow into her home. In fact, she identifies her partners soberly and with advanced planning, which in this context is far favorable to the many parents who might pick up someone at a bar and invite them back to their place without fear that they will be dragged to court by their co-parent. This hypocrisy issue, the question of judging men who are on that website, and who are the men who are on this website? They are people from all walks of life with diverse backgrounds, professions, and interests, and they are people we interact with regularly in the world. By his own admission, he is such a man. He acknowledges being a user of the same site, and that browsing it was how he learned that his wife was posting.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
There's more, but if that gives you a flavor. That's about a third of it.
Yeah, I don't understand how the judge wasn't like, yeah, let me rule on this right now. So, okay, so let's just sort of, wrap this up. So in May, you received the judgment, which was, can you tell me what she said? Did you have it?
I don't have it. I mean, I can paraphrase and
summarize. I have it. I have it in front of me.
There's a paragraph where that ends with that line, "This is the epitome of control." I wonder, Jonathan, if you could maybe just read that one small paragraph.
Sure. This gets to the heart of it. And so this was written by a magistrate judge. And so she referred to herself as the magistrate.
Okay.
And she wrote, "This magistrate finds that this case comes down to father not liking or wanting mother to participate on adult websites and in her chosen sexual activities. This magistrate finds that as much as father believes he is not trying to control mother's sex life and sexual activities, father is in fact doing so under the guise of safety concerns for minor child. This magistrate suspects that father's goal with these modification proceedings were to humiliate and embarrass mother in hopes that she would stop participating on the websites due to fear of losing custody of minor child or being embarrassed in court or professionally. This is the epitome of control."
Incredibly validating.
So essentially, she said no dice to him. And it sounds like she included some reprimands. I mean, that was certainly a reprimand. Were there more reprimands in this as well?
The intensity of that language, of that paragraph, is quite unusual in these. I mean, these are generally pretty dry legal documents. Rarely do you find any passion coming through from a judge in writing this, and that it's obvious.
Did this set set precedent?
So that's a good question. So one of the problems with state courts in general, and with really to a large degree with trial courts is that there's rarely distribution or access to a case. It's generally, when we talk about precedents, normally we're referring to cases that went on appeal and were heard by a judge on appeal. So it's only if a case had been heard on appeal that it would be binding on the judges in that state, in the trial court.
I see.
But trial court opinions, to the extent that you can find them, can absolutely be used and introduced and referred to in any court to just say, look, here's a judge who was presented with similar issues, and this is how they handled it. And that doesn't mean that you're obligated to follow, but this is a smart lawyer who handles all these things as a judge year in, year out, and this is what they decided. You should give this a consideration as well. So we would call that persuasive authority.
Okay. And when you say any court, are you saying like across the nation? Like this would not have to be in Maryland. Like if I had a client in California who was up against something similar, would citing this case be useful?
It certainly could be. It would be worth trying. The vast majority of family law cases have their trial court opinion issued, and then it vanishes into the ether. And unless you are the parties or you are the lawyers, you're never going to see it. Knowing that this case exists, if someone, if we don't arrange another way, someone can contact me, and I think we'll have a redacted version of this opinion that is suitable for sharing, and we could provide it with any court anywhere in the world. And it's up to that judge to consider the extent to which they think it's relevant or persuasive in their own court and under their own laws.
I think that's great. So Elle and Jonathan and I will convene and figure out if there's a way that we can maybe, put a redacted copy up in Dropbox or something and create a link for everybody, because I think that would be really, useful. I mean, I think that this is a huge step for women and women's sexual liberation in divorce, which is why I wanted you to come and tell this story. Elle, is there anything else that you want to add before we?
I mean, I just want to, again, I mean, I think when I read the decision, there was this urge to just want to shout it from the rooftops, right? Because I really felt like it wasn't just my victory. It was such a victory for women everywhere. And having been a part of your group for so long, and the support that community offered me during my divorce and after, and continues to this day, I just felt like that was the right place to share it and talk about it. And so I just, again, thank you so much, Kate. I think that this was just the perfect forum to talk about it.
I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that you wanted to share this story, because I think it's really important. It's really important. And I'm so proud of the fact that I remember when you shared it, I was sort of like biting my nails, because of course, the internet can be such a horrible place. And the support that you got on your post, and this is back in May, was just like,
so positive.
It was so beautiful. It was great. It was so positive. It
was wonderful.
Yeah, it was. Jonathan, where can people find you if needed / wanted?
Absolutely. So my name is Jonathan D. Lane, and my law firm is JD Lane Law. And so you can find my website at JD, as in David, LANELAW.com.
Awesome. Jonathan, Elle, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this story. I think it's so important. I'm so excited and thrilled that this went the way that it did for you.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.